Welcome to Frame of Mind, a show dedicated to raise mental health awareness here in Lawrence and the greater Merrimack Valley. Our hope is to support and educate family, friends, and individuals diagnosed with a mental health condition. Frame of Mind is brought to you by the Point After Club in Lawrence in partnership with Lawrence Cable Access Television. Hi, my name is Anna Harris. I'm a 12-year member of the Point After Club in Lawrence, Massachusetts.
Hello, my name is Tom Coppinger. I'm the director of the Point After Club.
All right. Hi, Tom. What
Anna,
is the Point After Club?
What is the point? What a great question. A lot of people say it's not anything to do with football as much as I love football. So the Point After Club is what's called a clubhouse. It's a international rehabilitation model for people with a history of mental illness. And it's a very unique partnership model. Members and staff work together to run the clubhouse, and in the process, develop opportunities for the members in what everybody wants, jobs, housing, education, social recreational opportunities, health and wellness. So it's an intentional community. It was created by a man named John Beard. He was the executive director of Fountain House, which was the first clubhouse that started actually some ex-patients at a hospital out of New York City. They were in Manhattan, over on West 47th Street, the club itself. Their original name was We Are Not Alone, WANA, which is a testament to all clubhouses now, because we are not alone. It's a big part of the solidarity and camaraderie that we have at the club. But based on the core principles, the need for member involvement, this partnership, working side by side, members and staff working together, the need to be needed, that whole need, we call it wanted, needed, and expected in the clubhouse. Creating an environment that is, that has enough work that really it is meaningful work. As for years, people with disabilities were put in sheltered workshops and stuff, and this was kind of identifying that these are individuals, men and women, who have capabilities and should be given opportunity to do meaningful activity that can lead towards, a better life. Member choice on all matters. These are the principles that John Beard put back in the late 50s at Fountain House. Member's choice. So it's the very first, what's the very first standard, Anna?
Membership is without limits.
Voluntary.
Voluntary.
Membership is voluntary. So basically it's the member's choice as to whether, they come to the club, whether they get involved at all. Sometimes some folks may just getting to the clubhouse, with the severity of the symptoms of their illness, it may be difficult, but getting to the club may be a big deal for them. But it's their choice as far as their involvement. However, it's not a clubhouse if the members and staff aren't working together. And it really is the collaborative nature of human interaction that makes it all work. It's recovery through work. Members and staff work together to run the business of the clubhouse. We break up all the work into different work units. And if you think about relationships, it's so much easier to have a relationship with someone when you're working with them. Or how do you make friends, right? At school, your classmates in school, your friends on the football, on sports teams, music, other extracurricular activities. And as you turn into an adult, one of the most important places that people find, relationships is work, right? Work and school, school, if they go into extended school, but work. And it's so much easier when you have something that you're working together on, whether it's in the clubhouse, making lunch, which is a pretty big deal, the heart of the clubhouse, or, looking for jobs, getting someone ready for a job and employment and education, or planning social activities or health and wellness activities, doing the billing, doing the administrative duties of the clubhouse. So members kind of choose where they find their niche within the clubhouse, but their contributions are so important to the running of the clubhouse. And for the staff, we're like talent scouts, trying to, bring out the talents that maybe some folks have lost through the process of their experience with the diagnosis of a major mental illness in many cases, and how that can kind of blindside people. So the clubhouse model from Fountain House starting in 1948 and with small origins is now in 34 countries. There's over 344 clubhouses in the world. And there's actually, there was 64 clubhouses that were in the process, starting in other countries and in the United States and Canada. So it's a model that is really growing. We were at a conference in Baltimore. That's where I got all those statistics back in September. And I think, the clubhouse model itself is beginning to get a lot more recognition, not only nationally, but internationally. We won the Conrad Hilton Humanitarian Award, an international award for alleviating human suffering. And just the basic equality aspect of it, how we work to decide and make decisions together, it's really brought on the thoughts of our clubhouses being a social justice movement, throughout the world.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Tom, for sharing that, and very informative and helpful, and hopefully we can get more people to understand clubhouses. And
yeah, we don't want to be the best kept secret. And that's part of the reason we're doing this show. And these, this is the beginning of getting back to the frame of mind and bringing in other folks, other members, and some other other folks to kind of share what's available for resources, because we find it's really connecting to those resources. And that's a big part of what we do too. Is we have tremendous community partners connecting to resources in the community, and and getting our members out there and being part of the community itself too.
All right. So how did the club get started?
How did the club get started? Actually in the 60s there was some movement towards deinstitutionalization. It's sad to say that, not too long ago, folks with a serious mental illness was put up, into these, state hospitals, and sometimes pretty much not seeing the light of day for many, many years. In the 60s, Kennedy talked about community mental health, bringing, John Kennedy, President Kennedy, talked about bringing mental health into the communities. And it actually took a Supreme Court decision in '74. Ken Donaldson, a man who was a patient incarcerated in Florida, went all the way to the Supreme Court to gain his freedom from the state hospital, which really kicked along what was called the deinstitutionalization movement. Out of state hospitals. So, you had people who had been there for, 30, 40 years, upwards of that, and it was hard getting out once you got in, unless you had, a strong family, and sometimes the families were talked into, well, he's better off here at this point. Because of that decision, there was a lot more money brought into the community and a lot more of an emphasis to get people out of the state hospitals, particularly the voluntary patients, into the community. And my mother, Rose, was working at the state hospital at the time, at Danvers, and she found some members who were out in the community, ex-patients, and she went around, because she was part of a reintegration group, and they basically reintegrating people back into the community. But what was happening back in those days, not only in Lawrence, or all around the country, they were calling it the revolving door, because people getting out of the hospital, but then they would go back into the hospital. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they would feign suicide or do anything they could to get back to the hospital, because that was the community that they knew. And you think about it, it's like for someone who was in a prison for so many years, coming back into the real world was really a very difficult transition. Mm-hmm. Without any supports, particularly in the community, and the stigma that still persists, but was even more profound to someone who hadn't been out in the community in such a long time. Right. And if you didn't have much for family and friends, you were given a small amount of money, whether it was supplemental security income, that was pretty much, below poverty level. And, you were on your own. And then many times being taken advantage of for other folks who were low income, or maybe with substance use disorders or whatever. But people would go back to the hospital. I worked at Danvers State Hospital myself in '78 for about 10 months. And I worked the third shift, and people, literally 3 times, people came knocking on the door in the early morning hours. They had walked from Lawrence back to Danvers State Hospital, their community. So Rose was my mother. She found some of the ex-patients, and they went around and checked out, what are some other people doing? And there were 3 programs in particular that were active at the time in the state of Massachusetts. Center Club in Boston, which was founded in 1959. Renaissance Club here in Lowell, we started in 1966, and West Winds in Fitchburg, we started in '72. Brought them out there. They were more drop-in type social clubs. So they basically was a place that people belonged, that had, a meal program, and they did social activities. Mm-hmm. This original group of charter members chose the name Point After, and the Point After hospitalization was meant for Danvers State Hospital, basically, the local state hospital up in Danvers. So Point After Danvers was the name of the club. And in February of, after experiencing such frustration and trying to get people out into the community with no place to go, my mother advocated to get funding for a club similar to these other programs, other social clubs, as part of the reintegration of folks, the Point After Club. And in February of 1980, she got funding through the Department of Mental Health to open up part-time at the time, Friday, Saturdays, and Sundays, the Point After Club in a small room, no bigger than this little studio here. 2 little rooms at the second floor of the YMCA over on Lawrence Street. So that was our humble beginnings. And from there, it took off. You know, and my mother was an incredible person as far as getting resource, but also developing this community, you know, that was based on, as it still is, about a caring and compassionate community that really cares about the members of our community, but also understands that, you know, it is our relationships, not only with ourselves, but with our larger community that really are an integral part of success. And that's where, you know, as we expanded into the clubhouse model of rehabilitation, you know, in focusing on some of the components of life that we all, you know, live and enjoy, whether it's jobs, you know, employment, housing, or need, housing, safe, affordable housing, health and wellness, you know, taking care of ourselves, and social recreational activity.
We have clubs, like within the club, like the LGBTQ group and
right, specialty things like Door Recovery Anonymous. You know, kind of anything we can do to kind of help and support our membership and get them involved. Not only, like I said, the relationships that we build, you know, based on the needs of our membership, but also the connections and resources that can enhance people's lives, whether it's a job, whether it's safe, affordable housing, going back to school. That was the other one, education I was looking for. So as we grew out the space at the Y. We got another room, and then we moved down the hall. We got a little pantry for making meals there. But we really expanded to a point where we had to find new space. And in 1984, June of 84, we moved into the Masonic Temple over on Jackson Street, 43 Jackson Street, which was our new home, which was a building that was really kind of in a little bit of rough condition at the time. But it was really us working with the Lawrence Masonic Association and rehabbing the building. And we had some great space there, a beautiful kitchen and a beautiful hall. And we were there for 29 years. And it was in the late 80s, I think it was 89, that the clubhouses, the social clubs in Massachusetts put together some advocacy to get monies to become clubhouses. And we went to New York City to Fountain House. Legislators went there, came back with additional funding for the social clubs to transform into clubhouses. The standards, the international standards for the clubhouse model had come out. And we were able to transform ourselves from social clubs into clubhouses at that time. And our agency also picked up the Haverhill Clubhouse at that time too as an additional program that my mother helped oversee.
All right. So, Tom, how did you become involved with the club yourself?
How did I become involved with the club? Well, I come from a large family. There's 9 of us. My mother was a single parent. By the time I was around 10 or so, I'm like sixth in line in the family. And she always worked. She was either working with folks with developmental disabilities. She was driving and working with folks who were blind. But then when she got to Danvers, I think she found her own connection and her passion working with folks with psychiatric disabilities. And she would bring us to the hospital at the time they had, the patients used to be able to work, and it was the community was very tight there. And the patients would go out in the fields and work in the fields. They work in the wood shops. They even did clerical duties and all these things. But then in the early 70s, someone put together a lawsuit and said, you need to pay these folks or they can't, this is slave labor. And when I worked there, some of the patients were so upset that they couldn't work anymore. By the time I worked there, they were spending, almost the whole day in a unit at the hospital. And my mother would take them out of the hospital and to parks. We used to go to the place, a Boy Scout camp in Salem, Mass, and we went to Hamilton Park, and then the great Red Sox game, and she'd have, Thomas, you watch this guy. Me and my brothers would kind of keep an eye on different folks for her and just help out and support, maybe cook some burgers or whatever she asked us to do, right? And what we saw was we got to meet these folks, and we got to know them. They were really cool people.
Yeah.
And they were very happy. And just getting out of the hospital, obviously was a thrill for them. And I know I've said this before. One of my brothers said, isn't it unreal how there was like a darkness that went over them when they got back to the hospital. So they'd be full of life, and then they get back to this Danvers, and it was like a darkness, And we used to, when I got into high school, I'd borrow my mother's car and go down, and have to pick her up. And we go into the unit in the hospital and kind of see this whole inner workings, which led me, I traveled a bit, and I came back, and my mother said, try giving Danvers a job, a shot at working. When I worked there, I mean, it was very eye-opening. That was a total different lens I was, involved in the sense of seeing the inner workings of the hospital and how really, how dark it was, in many ways. I read the charts, these charts this long of folks per people, and they were mostly all negative things that happened. Anything that happened bad was in these charts, and and then I meet the patients, and they were people just like me, and they had stories and lives, and so it was kind of, my mother was talking about the club at the time, and I was traveling a lot when I was a kid, so I went back on the road. But when I was on the road, wherever I went, I was out in San Diego, wondering what do they do with the mentally ill out here, and I actually talked to some people, and they showed me a residential program that was made out of an old motor lodge, which was pretty neat. And I went up to Seattle. I actually ran into Ken Kesey, who wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and it was cool because he was doing a symposium at the Space Needle, and he talked to me. He gave me some moments. I talked about my experience on the unit because he had worked at a state hospital down in Los Angeles prior to that. And that was what the impetus for his book, which was kind of really eye-opening for anyone who saw that movie and read the book, because it kind of gave an idea about are these folks really voluntary in the state hospital, as I alluded to earlier. Mm-hmm. No, they weren't. They weren't voluntary. They couldn't get out, and in some ways they were being controlled, and it wasn't until, like I said, it was brought to the Supreme Court that they did open the gates and the floods, but. So I told my mother. She said she was going to open up the club, and I stayed in touch with her. I said I would come back if she did. I said I'd come back for 1 year. I started on June 15th, 1980. And let's see, June 15th this year will be my 43rd year. So wow. No regrets. But that's how I get started.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
We're lucky to have you.
Well, I'm lucky to have you and all the incredible members of staff we've had over the years. Tell me a little bit about yourself, Anna. How'd you get started at the club?
So before college, I was at school and wasn't the greatest, very social. I was being bullied and had some issues with, mild depression, but nothing too serious. And once I got to college, things kind of took a downturn. I got accepted to Landmark in fall of 2006, and I started, and I remember going to classes and being somewhat active. But after classes, I would just go back to my dorm and isolate. So pretty much throughout the first 2 or 3 semesters, I was just a shell and wasn't really proving myself. I don't know if it was just partly because I was away from home and the environment that I knew and was familiar with. Then I went off to Colby Sawyer to get my bachelor's degree in 2008, and then I had planned to go back to Landmark as an alum, and I ended up being psychotic that weekend. Pretty much the whole weekend I was sick. I didn't know that at the time. I did not know anything about really much about psychosis and what.
Now, how old were you at that time?
21, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
22 maybe. I was familiar with it through my favorite actor, Maurice Benard, and because he struggles with mental illness, but I didn't know what was going on with me because I just felt it was kind of, I had no idea. I was at Landmark, I was with my friend, and I just remember being
So kind of like something you've never experienced before?
being traumatized that whole weekend and stuck and not sure what to do. I was calling my mom, and I was like terrified. And I called my friend Deb, and I was wondering what's going on with me. And I ended up, it was really lucky. It was fortunate I could go home Easter Sunday, the following day. I don't know how I was able to stay home that day, that full day, but my stepdad came to the college to get me, and sometimes I'm still unaware of how especially my mom kind of figured out that what was going on with me, because I really wasn't aware of that, of how much she actually knew until she had told me some of the stories about it. But I then was taken to the hospital the next day, the Monday after Easter. And then I knew I was taken to Bay Ridge after the local ER visit, and then was there for like a month, a full month.
So Bay Ridge is a psychiatric unit hospital, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it was like a really tricky, a really difficult and traumatic month, because it was a locked room, so I had a roommate like in the room with me, so I didn't know like her history, and if I had, it was like a different universe for me.
Pretty scary.
And I was like, oh my God, what if she's violent or can hurt me? And I'm sure she was probably scared of me too at first. But I took some time after, I think I got out of the hospital like end of April, maybe beginning of May of 2009. And I took time to recover as much as I could. And, it was medications and a lot of sleep and rest, bed rest to recover, and isolation. My mom did a lot of, my stepdad too, did a lot of work behind the scenes, and I didn't know about any place. I didn't think there was anything out there that would support me and that I could count on and be accepted into, because I just thought I kind of blamed myself for what happened, like how I got sick and everything. But at the end of the day, it was like, it was going to happen no matter where I was. So I basically just took a long several month mental health vacation, I guess. And then my mom told me about this wonderful place called the Point After Club, and at first I was like, well, what's that? And then the first day I think I took the tour, and then I met Charlotte, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. It was at the Masonic Temple, and I was very, very shy and nervous and petrified. I was like, oh my gosh. And I was like, is this somewhere I would sleep, like at a hospital or something? But I was like, no, it's okay. Like, my mom had to reassure me, I'm sure, and other people around me, but the feeling of, like, acceptance and seeing all these people, all the members and the staff be welcoming, and, like, the Campbell Center was fun, working in the thrift store was fun, and navigating different things, like getting a job at Garden Street. Like, that was, I think, my first job I think it was my first job, unless it was Stop and Shop, but I can't remember. But ironically enough, I live at Garden Street now, my own little home.
So you worked at Garden Street, now you live at Garden.
Yeah.
So Garden Street is like a HUD 811. It's a permanent housing for people with disabilities. We had 10 members that lived there. We developed that back we opened in 97.
Wow.
We had our 25th anniversary, right? Last August. Yeah.
But I was still a shell of myself when I first started at the club. I wasn't really engaging, but I mean, it took a little bit of time. Had to pace myself a little bit, but I pretty much started doing small things, then small things turned to big things, and then bigger things, like speaking at the State House and doing the advocacy for the staff to get higher pay, and just singing at the coffee houses and hanging out with my friends Marion and Barbara, and all my friends at the club, and getting to do this frame of mind. And I never would have thought, like, it really helps to have, like, finally have a place where I'm accepted, instead of being an outcast in school and being bullied for no reason other than because they're a little bit different than the rest of the popular kids. So, yeah.
So I kind of remember you coming in, and I know that Charlotte became a good advocate for you. What day is today for?
Her birthday.
Today's Charlotte's birthday. Tell you happy birthday. Maybe she'll see this Sunday.
Happy birthday, Charlotte.
She's out in Iowa now. She was our assistant director at the club back at the time. But happy birthday, Charlotte. But I do remember you as being like someone very quiet, when you came in, and I think I was with you when you spoke. When it came to advocacy, you've spoken twice to the Executive Office of Human Health and Human Services. You spoke in front of the legislature a few times for your fellow members, not only at the Point After Club, but statewide, and I think that's a real tribute to you, and your growth and your confidence and your spirit. So you come out of isolation. What are some tips you might give to someone who maybe out there watching this show that is listening, but is one of the most terrible things that happens with someone when they're diagnosed the first time? Usually, there's this fear of going out. They're on new medications that they're adjusting to in many cases, and sometimes one day turns into a month, turns into 6 months, and now they're stuck at home and not getting out into the world. And a lot of times that's some of the folks we get referred at the club. What are some of the benefits you think about getting out of isolation and coming into the club?
You have acceptance and compassion from others, and there's you have things to do, like, whether it's clerical work or working in the kitchen or just hanging out with friends and being social and talking with a friend and reaching out to somebody. I think just being able to reach out, and even if you need that little nudge from another human being, like your mom or your dad or a brother or a sister or whatever, it helps a lot to have backup, because if it's just yourself, then sometimes that's a little tricky.
So John Baird, who I alluded to earlier, was he went to Wayne State University out in Detroit, Michigan, and they're doing some research on the clubhouse model. And Dr. Francesca Panici did a survey of 1,000 members. I know we've talked about it. Do you remember what the two things that they came out overwhelmingly, the clubhouse members talked about worldwide, about what?
Acceptance and something to do.
Something to do. Acceptance was one, but you said it earlier. Friendships.
Friendships, yeah.
Friendships was a really big thing, and I think that kind of stands out. You know, everybody needs that human contact too. I watched the video. Actually, Marianne was saying it right away when we talked about this earlier today. You know, we watched a video from '87. A gentleman who was a member of Fountain House put this video together. Mark Glickman. He's a TV personality out in San Diego, but he's a great leader in the clubhouse movement. And he brought this new member, Maria. She had just joined the clubhouse at Fountain House, which she'd been a member for a while at this point. But when they asked her, what was the thing when you first joined the club? What was it that struck you the most? And she said, just hearing my name. Hello, Maria. Hi, Maria. Everybody was coming up to her saying, hi, Maria. And we just had a Maria that I was telling her to, Maria Lopez. And how you think about that, you know, if you're isolating, you don't even hear your name, you know, in that human contact, and then taking it that extra step to friendships, you know, and meaningful relationships. You know, the peer support that happens at the club. I know we've got great relations with the members and staff, but the peer support is so crucial. You know, you guys have been through, you know, and even if you look, we did a survey of the 36 clubhouses in Massachusetts, 37% of our staff have some form of lived experience too of a mental health condition. So, you know, there's been there, you know, and kind of support people. The support that everyone gives each other is amazing.
What memories do you have of any good stories of your mom and and how she founded the club, and any good advocacy stories?
Well, you know, what's amazing about my mother is, you know, and Lawrence in general, there was, you know, back in those days, if you kind of look at 1980, there was something about 1980 and 80 those few years. So the Point After Club, February 1980. Bread and Roses started in, I think it was November of 1980. Lazarus House was in 1982. The Daybreak Shelter was right around there, 83, 84. My mother was on the board of directors of, you know, Neighbors in Need and Lazarus House. Was on the committee that developed the Daybreak Shelter. It was first over at the Armory over on what is that, North Street, I think it is, over by the stadium. So the first day of that shelter, they had the Eagle Tribune was down there, the mayor was down there. They had all this food and the cots ready, and they didn't have any. They didn't have any homeless. So we knew where the homeless were, you know, because some of them were coming to the club regularly. And so my mother called me up. We had this old yellow van that was given to us. It was a 15-passenger. And she said, Thomas, go down under the bridge and see Tark and those guys and get them to come down, because they didn't have any homeless. So I went down under the bridge, and sure enough, there was a good group of folks there. And I convinced them to come with me to go to the Daybreak Shelter for the first day. And that was kind of one of those funny experiences. But it kind of signifies of how involved she was at the beginning of a lot of these, you know. When we started at the YMCA, housing has been it still is, but still is a nightmare. But, you know, a lot of these folks are coming out of Danvers State Hospital. We had 22 men living at the Y, because there were no group homes at the time. There were 3 case managers. There was hardly any money. There was the day treatment program over on Essex Street. But there was no other supports. You know, we were kind of like the only game in town, and we were open 7 days a week, 10 to 10. It was kind of wild. And so we got 22 men living at the Y, and then what do you do with the women? You know, we were putting them up at the Motel 110. We were getting money donated so we could get rooms for them at the, you know, when they were in that type of a need. And then she knew the folks over at the YWCA. Jocelyn Converse, I think the woman's name, Dr. Scarito, Dr. Nina Scarito was on the board, and they had the Immigrant City Archives was on the 3rd floor there at the YW, and some, you know, in her way, she talked them into moving them out of there, which is not a Lawrence History Center actually, but they moved them. We moved them to the South Lawrence Library. You know, my brothers of course got involved, and some of the club members helped me and other staff, and my mother got furniture donated and carpeting, and we painted the walls, and we created a 10-unit residence for women at the YWG. Wow. You know, like we developed it, And she got all the resources from all over the place. With no money, we had 22 men at the Y, and we had 10 women at the YWCA, right across the hall from each other over there on Lawrence Street. It was kind of amazing, you think about it. And that was when some money came in, and they did start. I think the first Phil Christian over on Franklin Street was the first residence for men. Some of the men moved out of the Y and over there. When we moved out, you think about it, just moving across the Common, but moving from the Common over to Masonic Temple, because when we were at the Y, we were right at the Y. The women were right at the YW. We were right there. We moved across the Common. It was like, it could have been like, 10 blocks or whatever, because you just didn't have that access to what was going on. And more money was coming out into the community. So, we were able to get a women's residence. So they named it after my mother, Coppinger House over on Haverhill Street, and the Field Christian. So a lot of those folks moved out. The residence is no longer for folks like members of the Point After Club or folks with mental health conditions, but it's still a residence. And we've said some over at the third floor at the Y. It still does exist as a 10-room residence. I guess originally it was for some nurses for Lawrence General Hospital, some nuns, the Venerini sisters, I believe it was, when it was originally constructed. But there's lots of funny stories. But I went to protect the innocent. But she was an amazing person. And what's incredible is the spirit that she had is so strong that it persists in the clubhouse. Members who haven't even met her feel they know her. When she passed, it was very powerful how members went over to City Hall and advocated for Rose Coppinger Day, and what a here she was who advocated and certainly saw the person in everyone, and she knew that no one was better than anyone else. We're all the same. We all have stories in life that we tell, that we live, I guess more importantly, and it's our one shot, right? So we got to do, and we didn't respect everybody for who they are, and she did. She took she'd spend hours and hours in the emergency room with someone. I don't think she ever slept. She was like unbelievable. She got us into adulthood. I always say that. You figure 9 kids. She started the club when she was 51.
Wow.
And she was tirelessly advocating. The greatest advocate that I know. When it all comes down to it, people know who cares.
Yeah.
Even like a baby knows who cares. An animal knows who cares. And when we look at human services and people who support people, and we just saw the video of the great Marie Balter when she spoke to the members at the club, who was a great friend of the Point After Club, and she was talking about remember and yes, there was staff at the hospital that did horrible things, but there were staff at the hospital that were very caring and compassionate, and all the patients knew who they were, and I think that's something that I can use the word love in our community, and that's the foundation that my mother laid down. Caring and looking at the person as a person first, and everybody's different. We were so much the same, of course, but everyone's different and has their own little story, and we need to respect them and give them an opportunity to show us who they are. Not look at their past history and all these thick books that tell all these negative things about them, right? Let's give them an opportunity
to talk and speak out.
Yeah. Show us, and give them an opportunity. And sometimes, like I think, in forgiveness, like people mess up. And I remember her always telling me, sometimes, and that was, she was talked about adverse childhood experiences back in the early 80s. Now it's a big thing. Everyone's talking about the impact that has on people. But she talked about it, and educated us all about that back many years ago. And understand that some folks did not have opportunities that other people had. And some folks, children went through horrible things, and that's how they got to where they are. That's their story. That their story isn't over though, right? Mm-hmm. They, with the proper supports, let's give them an opportunity to change their lives. And that's
right.
Something that, that she certainly taught us, and I think, that's been a big part of the Point After Club community over the years. Forgiveness.
I wish I could have met your mom. She was
I wish she could have met you.
Cool lady.
She was very funny too. She had a lot of fun. What are the challenges for the Point After Club that we face?
Yeah, well, lack of staff. We don't have the full staff.
Well, I think funding. I think one of the things, I say it, sometimes when I get frustrated, but when we have these mass shootings, and they say it's not the guns, it's people with mental illness. Then there's simply 3 words: fund, then 4 words, then fund mental illness. Fund, give supports. There's not enough funding. For whatever reason, it still is not even looked at, in the same level by insurance company as a medical illness. So the funding is really such a huge issue. We've got our staff who are doing incredibly complex jobs with very complicated, working with people who have very complicated lives, and making, in level with people working at Walmart and stuff. It's absurd. And I think we've got to all do a better job of advocating with our legislators and people in government to understand and get the message out, because the stories we know and that we're going to be sharing on this show, Frame of Mind, of the members, the success stories, and the importance of having this type of a community as part of the larger community, and it bridges people into that community, is so crucial and can be such a life-changing event for people. But when you're down, like we're down 3.5 staff now, it is a huge challenge. And we want to work with our agency, VinFin, and the other clubhouses and legislators and other agencies and folks. And in particular, we need voices from the folks who receive these services, you guys, because your stories are amazing in your recovery. You're an amazing person, Anna. I mean that. You mentioned Maurice Bernard earlier. Tell her tell the folks here what you told me. It just happened over the weekend.
I'm hoping to have a podcast, maybe here. I saw the lovely podcast studio many months ago, and I was like, ooh.
Pretty cool.
Maurice Bernard, as I mentioned, is one of my favorite.
If they don't know, what show is he on?
He's on General Hospital. He plays Sonny Corinthos. Mm-hmm. He has his own YouTube show called State of Mind, and where he interviews people, like whether it be coworkers from his show or like other soap operas that they compete with, other actors, or just people who advocate for mental health. He brings them on his show and interviews them, and it's like a little back and forth. And I kind of took a shot, and I've just said, hey, I'm like one of your number one fans, and your courage and advocacy and support of NAMI and different mental health organizations means the world to me, and asked if I could interview him for my podcast show, and he said yeah.
See, you don't even have a podcast show, and you got Maurice Bernard for General Hospital already ready to be interviewed. I love it. And then I did hear one of your interviews that you had, and that was with Carly Simon's son-in-law?
Yeah, his name is Dean Bragonier, and he's a disability advocate. And I met him in person when I first met Carly many years ago, and I kind of became fascinated with his advocacy and like the whole the Simon family. I think Carly has dyslexia, as does Dean and Sally. Mm-hmm. I believe Sally's son Bodie also has dyslexia, if I'm not mistaken. So he travels the world and talks about, the A's and B's of dyslexia, and that, what people struggle with it. And
yeah, I heard the interview. It was excellent. Yeah. Great job on that.
Thank you.
So you've got a future here in this business,
yeah.
I think. And hopefully we can get this opportunity with the beautiful new podcast here at LCAT be involved with that. Yeah, so some of the future shows that we're talking about, obviously we want to match up members and staff and members, and to have a similar conversation, talk about their recovery stories. What are the things that help them and support them in moving forward? Because we want to help folks, particularly those that maybe are isolating now, to maybe see this, or family members, to encourage them to seek out supports, because there is help for people, and a lot of times that darkness, we can shed some light on that darkness, right? We also we have a jug band. We want to get the jug band down here in the studio, play a few songs for you, and hear from the jug band too, the stories of their lives, and how music influences them and supports them in their lives. I know you're part of the jug band, Anna. We get some of our jug band members here in the studio today. A tour of the club. We want. I know Sarah here really wants us to get over there and get the tour of the club down, and that's something we're really excited about. Because not only is it something that we could get people on the show, on the cable show here, but also really have, as we do orientations and stuff, and people wondering what the club's about. What a great way! Nothing better than the visual, seeing what's going on in the club. And then maybe some discussion around other resources, employment, opportunities at the clubhouse, the importance of health and wellness. There are some things there that we have a mental health awareness event coming up that we've actually partnered with LCAT. They've videotaped it, I think, like the last 7 or 8 years.
Yep.
It's over at the Lawrence Heritage State Park. This year, we use the Mental Health America theme, and this year's the theme is the community that surrounds us, and what the physical space around us, how important that is, where we live, right, where we work, what's the green space around us, and how this impacts our mental health also. We also get an opportunity to hear the jug band too, but that day have lunch. But the opening of our art gallery, there's a beautiful art gallery at the Heritage State Park. We'll be doing that, and that's just another way. We have the mayor come and proclaim it Mental Health Awareness Month, because May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and so we're excited about that. Tell a little bit about what you've been a team captain for how many years now? The NAMI is the National Alliance for Mentally Ill. They do an annual walk for the minds of America. What's that about?
So NAMI, they have a walk every May. May 9th, is it May 19th?
May 20th.
May 20th this year, at Artesani Park in Boston. It's typically a 3-mile walk. I've done it. I've raised funds for the last couple years. I want to say maybe 7 or 8 years.
We've been doing it quite a while now, yeah.
And last year I raised over 1,000, I think. Mm-hmm. I have 305 raised so far this year as team captain. This year I think it's a little different this year. They're still having a walk, but they're more gearing it towards celebration. Okay. They're having festival, they're having speakers, music, and artisans and booths, and so hopefully, and stuff for the kids.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, there's usually about 10,000 people there.
Yeah.
At Fox 25, they do a good job of supporting that too. Some of the other folks. Let's see. So, what else we got? We talked a little. We didn't talk at all about the pandemic and how we got out of that. But that was something that was really quite the incredible challenge for us. On March 17th, 2020, we had our corned beef and cabbage dinner, but we're told that we were closing the next day, March 18th, in 2020, and it was really for everybody. And this is kind of gets back into the isolation thing issue. Because I think the whole world found out about the devastating impact of isolation on folks through the pandemic, on your mental health and other things. And I think I'm so proud of our community. We rallied, and kind of kept things busy and kept contact with each other. Our goal is to get people out of isolation, and then we have this stay at home or you can't leave home. But we were able to keep the ball rolling, and I think it's a tribute to the members and staff of our clubhouse community and our community partners who helped us out so much. Lawrence has so many great community partners. And we delivered meals, friendship, and we created projects to keep things busy, and eventually created Zoom. And off of it, I think we're a stronger community, honestly. And actually, me and Anna, we had a Zoom contact. We had a Zoom talk last night to get ready to talk a little bit about this show here. And that's one of the new strengths that we have is the virtual contact, and we're still trying to work on that digital divide and get devices in people's hands, and not only devices but the know-how, the tech club to kind of teach people how to use those. And that might be something that we can talk about in the future too.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you want to join the Point After Club,
if anybody out there is interested in becoming a member of the Point After Club, you can contact us at 978-681-7753.
We're over at the Everett Mills, the entrance B, lower level on the south side of the building. We've got beautiful space built out. Hopefully we'll be putting together a tour that you'll see on a future show. We want to thank our folks, our guests, and once again, our gratitude to Lawrence Cable Access Television for giving us this opportunity to share our experiences here and our beautiful Point After Club community with you all.
Thank you, guys.